So good day everyone. This is the report of Group 9. So our topic is about the Philippine executive and redemocratization. So this chapter on the executive focuses on the redemocratization period that began with Corazon Aquino's ascendancy to power following the People Power Revolution, or referred as the EDSA I, that toppled the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos, which caused him to leave the country on February 25, 1986. After Corazon Aquino announced the revolutionary government in 1986 with the Freedom Constitution, the 1987 Constitution was ratified, establishing a six-year presidential term. Aquino exercised executive power from 1986 to 1992, followed by Fidel V. Ramos on 1992 to 1998. Joseph Ejercito Estrada from 1998 to 2001, who resigned amid EDSA II, and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who completed Estrada's term and won her in 2004, later facing electoral fraud charges. Various frameworks analyze Philippine presidential leadership, including those by Remigio Agpal, Belinda Aquino, with Felipe Miranda, and Randolph David. Data on the four presidents post-1986 comes from research, literature, and contemporary events records. The analysis considers how 1986 constitutional charges constrained executive power compared to Marcos era, provisions that enable one-man rule, framing the presidency within the context of re-democratization and people power. Civil society groups became key political actors after helping overthrow Marcos in the 1986 EDSA People Power event and have since grown influential in shaping government. The post-1986 period is designed by democratization, restoring democracy lost under Marcos. Democracy is viewed as an ideology, system, and ideal. The Philippine case aligns with this framework, with the 1986 revolution. So societal group articulations and surveys reflecting indicators of democratic governance. Political scientist Jose Albueva distinguishes between minimal procedural democracy, free elections, no fraud, and optimal substantive democracy where the system fulfills public goals through effective purposes. The presidency is a vital institution in this context, needing democratization while also driving it. This analysis uses new institutionalism and behavioralism to examine how the 1986 Constitution structured presidential powers, focusing on interactions between the president and other political institutions or the military bureaucracy, legislature, judiciary, parties, and civil society. Corazon Aquino is assessed first as her presidency began the post-authoritarian era. Her background as a housewife whose husband was slain shaped her rise to power and the country's political and constitutional history. So each subsequent president had distinct backgrounds and challenges. So Fidel Ramos is a military man turned politician, navigated democratization. Joseph Estrada is a former actor, faced leadership issues, and stepped down during EDSA II in 2001. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo took office via succession and later election, with accountability mechanisms unlike people power, resignation, impeachment, and elections playing roles. The February 1986 events ended years of opposition to Marcos, with nonviolent protests from February 2022 to 2025 rather, leading to his flight on February 25 and Corazon Aquino assuming power. Legitimized by people power support and her victory in the February 7 snap elections, EDSA I was triggered by immediate events and a long-standing public discontent with Marcos. First elected in 1965 and re-elected in 1969, Marcos imposed martial law in 1972 before his term ended, citing threats to the republic. The 1971 Constitution Convention drafted a new charter, and the 1973 Constitution expanded presidential powers, further strengthened by amendments in 1976 and 1981. That year, Marcos lifted martial law and established the new republic, But protests grew after former Senator Benigno Aquino's return from exile and assassination, leading Marcos to call snap elections. So Marcos ran for president against Corazon Aquino, which is the widow of Benigno Aquino, and claimed victory, sparking protests and civil disobedience campaign backed by the church. Defense Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, Fidel V. Ramos, and young military men announced their break from Marcos. Cardinal Sin called on people to support them at EDSA. With mass demonstrations, military defections, and U.S. assistance, Marcos fled to Hawaii on February 25, 1986. Aquino was sworn in a president the same day, marking the start of the Philippines' transition to redemocratization. Her priorities included restoring pre-martial law democratic institutions and addressing inequality, social justice, and development. She issued key proclamations. The Proclamation 1 declared sovereignty resides with the people. Number 2, lifted Marcos' suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. Number 3, established an intern freedom constitution. In April, she created a constitutional commission to draft a new charter, which was completed in October 1986 and ratified as the 1987 Constitution in February 1987. Congressional elections followed in May and July 1987. Corazon Aquino rallied the opposition against Marcos after her husband Benigno Aquino's assassination, running in the February 1986 snap elections and contesting Marcos' claimed victory over electoral fraud. Jose Abueva noted she was the moral authority and unifying force against Marcos, becoming a symbol of the united opposition and leading the civil disobedience campaign. Her political strength, called Cory Magic, stemmed from her background as a non-traditional politician, educated, a housewife, devout Catholic, and conciliatory. While she had political exposure through her family, father and uncles were elected officials, she disliked past politicians' tactics and avoided traditional alliances with her sincerity seen as refreshing. Aquino ran as an opposition candidate without a party, supported by a moral mass base, including the church, business community, moderates, and even some in the military. She said that came to be the power of via a loose coalition forced by opposition to Marcos, which included diverse civil society groups with differing socio-economic goals. Some tried to pull her toward their sides, revert to discredited pre-martial law practices. Aquino's supporters shared a common goal. So to remove Marcos and his autocratic government, she completed her full 6-year term, allowed public assessment of her performance, resisted extending her stay, and saw her role as transitioning the country from Marcos' dictatorship to restored democracy. Fidel Ramos, Aquino's anointed successor, was elected president in 1992 with just 24% of votes, an unusual result of as prior elections saw fierce competition between two major parties, while 1992 featured multiple candidates from different parties. It was the first presidential election under the 1987 Constitution's 6-year, non-re-electable term rule, and Ramos campaigned using coalition-building strategies. Ramos entered politics after military retirement, embodying the military politician type. He was a top student, graduating the first in elementary, topping military exams, and earning degrees from West Point and the University of Illinois. His father was a congressman and diplomat, and Ramos rose to become a general and chief of the Philippine Constabulary under Marcos. He joined Enrile and the Reform the Armed Forces movement in 1986 EDSA uprising after learning of Marcos' plans against the rebels, and was instrumental in the strategy that toppled the dictatorship. Aquino appointed Ramos as Chief of Staff and later Secretary of Defense. He successfully lead military coups and communist insurgents and secessionist groups, earning her support for his 1992 presidential bid. Initially competing for the Labanang Demokratikong Pilipino or LDP nomination, he formed a new party which is the Lakas Tao after losing, which merged into the Lakas NUCD multi-party coalition. Ramos completed his 6-year term, allowed public assessment of his leadership, and resisted efforts to amend the 1987 Constitution to extend his stay in power. Joseph Ejercito Estrada won the May 1998 presidential elections with 40% of votes, defeating the closest rival Jose de Venecia with 23.9%. Under the Laban ng Makabayang Masang Pilipino or LAMMP banner, competing against over 10 other candidates. His erupt phenomenon stemmed from strong appeal to lower class votes, or the 52% of his supports came from the middle class, D, and the poor E groups. Before presidency, honed political administrative skills as mayor of San Juan or the 1969 to 1986, earning awards like Outstanding Mayor and Foremost Nationalist. Post EDSA 1, he was elected senator on 1987 and vice president in 1992. Joseph Ejercito was his christened name, or Estrada came from his movie career, and Erap was his popular nickname. Joseph Ejercito Estrada adapted his screen name professionally. His successful film career drew support from moviegoers, TV viewers, and others, with his popularity boosted by Erap jokes and his relatable persona as a movie actor who connected with the masses. Stories of his personal struggles and success inspired many, and his political style used movie script-like tactics, catchy slogans, and emotional appeals. His pro-poor image and programs gained backing from some progressives and intellectuals, rooted from in his on-screen roles than his actual background. Estrada's victory resulted from a mix of his celebrity status, communication strategy, political machinery, financial support, and name recognition, factors that outweighed those of other candidates. His presidency ended early with resignation on January 20, 2001, amid EDSA 2. The crisis was triggered by Ilocos Sur Governor Luis Orchabit Singson's revelation of Estrada's involvement in illegal dueting gambling. The House of Representatives initiated impeachment, which the Senate presided over. When pro-Estrada senators blocked opening a key envelope, protests erupted against EDSA 2, with sectors like the church and military backing the movement. Some cabinet members resigned, and Estrada stepped down. He was later charged and detained for plunder. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo is the daughter of former President Diosdado Macapagal, who rose from a poor family in Lubao, Pampanga, and became the fifth post-independence president under the 1955 Constitution. Arroyo embraced her father's poor man from Lubao image, while also being linked to the royal house of Lacandula via her maternal lineage. She earned degrees from Assumption College, or the Magna Cum Laude, Georgetown University, Ateneo University for the Masters, and the University of the Philippines for the PhD in Economics, and worked as a teacher. Her political career began with Corazon Aquino appointed her Undersecretary of Trade and Industry. She won a Senate in a seat 1992 under LDP, topping the race with a focus on her family name and mass appeal strategies, and was re-elected in 1995. In 1998, she ran for vice president under Lakas Party and won, even as her presidential running mate lost. She later served as Secretary of Social Welfare and Development in Joseph Estrada's cabinet before resigning amid political crisis. So the 1987 Constitution, Executive Power and Redemocratization. Arroyo won her own term in 2004 against Fernando Poe Jr., but her presidency faced a crisis the following year when a tape purportedly showed her discussing election victory assurance with a commission on elections official. Calls for her resignation or removal emerged, seen as a political and constitution crisis. She and her supporters responded by strengthening public support and demonstrating effective governance. The 1987 Constitution, or the Executive Power and Redemocratization. Corazon Aquino announced that interim freedom constitution in March 1986, granting herself executive and lawmaking powers. It was replaced by the 1986 Constitution, or drafted by the Constitutional Commission, signed on October 15, 1986 and ratified on February 1987. The 1987 Constitution vests executive power on the President within a presidential, democratic, Republican system. Qualifications include being a natural-born citizen, registered voter, literate, at least 40 years old on election day, and resident for 10 years prior. Both President and Vice President serve 6-year terms starting June 30 post-election, with no re-election. They are elected by direct vote, receive fixed salaries, are not reducible during tenure, and the Constitution outlines succession and removal via impeachment. The Constitution specifies and restricts executive powers to prevent abuse, drawing from lessons of Marcos' rule, critical provisions and over emergency powers, and suspension of habeas corpus and martial law declarations. So the 1987 Constitution covers law, appointment powers, and public officer accountability, including removal via impeachment. In principle, it restored democracy by establishing direct presidential elections, defining executive powers and legislative checks and balances, and emphasizing public accountability. The direct constitutional mandates. The president is the sole executive, controlling all executive departments, bureaus, and offices, and ensuring laws are faithfully executed. Even with decentralization under the Local Government Code, the President has general supervision over local governments and autonomous regions to enforce law compliance, and must establish regional development bodies for administrative decentralization and socio-economic progress. The President nominates and appoints officials, including department heads, ambassadors, and military officers at colonel, naval, captain rank of higher. To avoid abuse seen under Marcos, appointments are prohibited 2 months before elections through the end of the term. Appointments by an acting president may be revoked by the elected president within 90 days of assuming office. The president submits a budget of expenditures and financing sources of Congress within 30 days of each regular session, including existing and proposed revenue measures for the General Appropriations Bill. The President leads all armed forces and may call them out to prevent or suppress lawless violence, invasions, or rebellion. So the additional provisions under the 1987 Constitution include: the President may suspend habeas corpus or declare martial law for up to 60 days in cases of invasion, rebellion, or public safety threats, and must submit a report to Congress within 48 hours. Congress may revoke or extend these measures by majority vote. The Supreme Court may review their factual basis. Martial law does not suspend the Constitution, civil courts or legislative assemblies, and military jurisdiction over civilians is prohibited when civil courts can function. Habeas corpus suspension applies only those charged with rebellion or invasion related offenses, who must be charged within 3 days are released, closing gaps in the 1935 Constitution that allowed Marcos to exercise excessive discretion. The President must disclose their health condition to the public, especially in case of serious illness, a response to Marcos hiding his true health status during his dictatorship. The President may contract or guarantee foreign loans with a prior monetary board, concurrence, and legal limits, and must submit loan applications guarantees, including those by government-owned corporations affecting foreign debt. These provisions address inefficiencies and debt issues with Marcos era deeded by his allies.
The next part is the vice president and presidential succession. The vice president had the same qualification, manner of election, and impeachment process as the president according to the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines. The 1987 Constitution prescribed the line of succession when issues arise at the commencement of the term and during term of office of the president and vice president. If the president-elect has not been qualified or chosen, the vice president elect as a president. If both have not been chosen or qualified, the Senate president act as president, and if still unable, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, if the president-elect dies or become permanently disabled, the vice president-elect shall become president. During the term of office, if there is death, permanent disability, removal from office, or resignation of the president, the vice president serve the unexpired term. If both the president and vice president cannot serve, the succession starts with the Senate president, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives, until a president or vice president shall have been elected and qualified. If the vice presidency becomes vacant, the president nominates a replacement from the Senate or House of Representatives confirmed by majority of all members of both houses of Congress. If vacancy in the offices of the president and vice president occurs, Congress calls for a special election, but no special election declares in writing that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The vice president becomes acting president. The majority of the members of the cabinet can also declare this. This constitutional provision were applied in the cases of Joseph Ejercito Estrada and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, where the resignation of Estrada and the accession of the vice president to the presidency become operational. Topic: the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines explained the vice president and presidential succession. The vice president has the same qualification, manner of election, and impeachment process as the president. If the president dies, resigns, is removed from office, or becomes permanently disabled, the vice president serves the unexpired term as president. If both the president and vice president cannot serve, the Senate president and then the Speaker of the House of Representatives will act as president until a president or vice president is chosen. The vice president can also become acting president if the president declared that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, or if the majority of the members of the cabinet declare it. These constitutional rules were applied in the cases of Joseph Ejercito Estrada and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. The next is we have the public accountability. Public office is a public trust, and government officials and employees must be accountable at all times. They must serve with responsibility, integrity, loyalty, patriotism, justice, and lead modelist life. The president, vice president, members of the Supreme Court, constitutional commissions, and ombudsman can be removed from office through impeachment or culpable violation of the Constitution, treason, bribery, graft, and corruption, other high crimes, or betrayal of public trust. The House of Representatives has the exclusive power to initiate impeachment cases, while the Senate has the sole power to try and decide the cases. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides but does not vote in the impeachment proceedings. The Filipino people were able to watch the impeachment of former President Joseph Ejercito Estrada through television and radio, including the House of Representatives action and the Senate hearings presided by Chief Justice Hilario David. So public accountability means public office is a public trust. So government officials must serve the people with responsibility, integrity, loyalty, efficiency, patriotism, justice, and modest life. If the president, vice president, or other high officials commit treason, bribery, graft, and corruption, or betrayal of public trust, they can be removed from office through impeachment. The House of Representatives starts the impeachment case and the Senate decides the case. So during the impeachment of Joseph Ejercito Estrada, the people watched the hearings on televisions and radio led by Hilario David, the Chief Justice. So an example of public accountability is the impeachment case of Joseph Ejercito Estrada. He was accused of corruption and betrayal of public trust. So the House of Representatives started the impeachment case and the Senate held the trial. So during the hearings, the Filipino people watched the proceedings on television and radio, and the trial in the Senate was presided by Hilary David, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Presidential performance and dynamics of power. Assessments on the poor president range from favorable to fiercely critical, showing and personal interest and struggle for power sometimes undermine democratic political process. Except for Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's elected term of office 2004 to 2010, the sections cover her successor term referring to the unexpired term of Joseph Estrada and 2 years of Estrada's presidency prior to IDSA II, and the full 6 year term respectively of Corazon Aquino and Fidel Ramos, of the strategic importance with respect to the executive power and function of 1987 Philippine Constitution, are the President's performance on the restoration of democracy and constitutionalism and relationship with the legislature, bureaucracy, judiciary, military, and civil society. Restoration of democracy and constitutionalism. Corazon Aquino carried people's mandate for restoration, democratic processes and institutions, issued Proclamation Number 2 to lift suspicion of writ of habeas corpus, appointed 1986 Constitutional Commission, ratified 1987 Constitution, held congressional elections 1987 and synchronized elections in 1992, overcame coups, showed civilian supremacy as commander-in-chief, started peace negotiation with insurgent groups, exercised political decentralization, restored civil service and bureaucracy norms, pursued plunder case against Marcos, completed 6 years term without re-election, enabled peaceful presidential succession. In Fidel Ramos, we have the consolidated democratic gains, focus on political continuity and economy, declared he would not seek term extension, assured elections in 1998, and orderly transfer of power. Chacha movement and other attempts to extend his term, halted by Cardinal C. N. Aquino, and multi-sectoral coalitions, held May 11, 1998 elections. Joseph Estrada proclaimed president. The next is Joseph Estrada. We have the Centennial Presidents who talk out at Bersuin Church, inaugural at Carino Grandstand, promoted roving presidency, organized cabinet, prepared programs against poverty, criminality, and corruption. So personal behavior lead to impeachment. It's a two. People power forced him to declare inability to discharge duties and resign. Supreme Court confirmed with Vice President Arroyo as a successor. Capagal Arroyo continued democratization from status term, ran for her own term in 2004, became accountable for elections, while incumbent impeachment attempted but did not prosper. All of four presidents promoted decentralization through local government. Could 1991 gave power to local government units and created autonomy regions in Mindanao and Lake, called Cordillera. Restoration of democracy and constitutionalism. Corazon Aquino carried people's mandate for restoration, democratic processes and institutions, issued Proclamation Number 2 to lift suspicion of writ of habeas corpus, appointed 1986 Constitutional Commission, ratified 1987 Constitution, held congressional elections 1987 and synchronized elections in 1992, overcame coups, showed civilian supremacy as commander-in-chief, started peace negotiation with insurgent groups, exercised political decentralization, restored civil service and bureaucracy norms, pursued plunder case against Marcos, completed 6 years term without re-election, enabled peaceful presidential succession. In Fidel Ramos, we have the consolidated democratic gains, focus on political continuity and economy, declared he would not seek term extension, assured elections in 1998, and orderly transfer of power. Chacha movement and other attempts to extend his term, halted by Cardinal C. N. Aquino, and multi-sectoral coalitions, held May 11, 1998 elections. Joseph Estrada proclaimed president. The next is Joseph Estrada. We have the Centennial Presidents who talk out at Bersuan Church, inaugural at Carino Grandstand, promoted roving presidency, organized cabinet, prepared programs against poverty, criminality, and corruption. So personal behavior lead to impeachment. Itsutu, people power forced him to declare inability to discharge duties and resign. Supreme Court confirmed with Vice President Arroyo as a successor. Gloria Arroyo continued democratization from Estrada's term, ran for her own term in 2004, became accountable for elections while income been in impeachment attempted but did not months of the president after the 1986 IDSA People Power Revolution. So the main goal of the president was to restore democracy, constitutionalism, and democratic institution in the Philippines. They also needed to work with the legislature, judiciary, military, bureaucracy, and civil society to strengthen the government and democratic processes. Corazon Aquino restored democratic institution after the revolution, helped create the 1987 Constitution, held elections, and competed for 6-year terms peacefully. Fidel Ramos focused on political stability and economic development and allowed a peaceful transfer of power in 1998. Joseph Estrada started programs for poverty and crime but was impeached and removed during EDSA II. So Gloria Macapagal Arroyo became president after Estrada and continued the government programs and decentralization through the local government code. Next part, we have the legislative-executive relations. During Corazon Aquino's presidency, executive-legislative relations involved bargaining and compromise with Congress. Factors affecting this included the volatile multi-party system, upper income class domination, and shifting alliances. Some legislators opposed her an agrarian reform, budget with tax measures, U.S. military bases negotiations, and presidential appointment. But she still passed important legislation such as the Local Government Code 1991, showing cooperation between the executive and the legislature. Under Fidel Ramos, he relied on the Rainbow Coalition strategy led by Speaker Jose de Venecia and created the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, which enabled the passage of bills favorable to his administration. Ramos built coalitions and consensus in both the House and Senate, demonstrating political skills and strong executive leadership in bridging executive legislative relations. Joseph Estrada did not gain rapport with the 11th Congress, facing conflicts over pork barrel, budget, and the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council. The House under Manuel Villar obtained signatures for his impeachment, while he found allies in the Senate who obstructed the pro-impeachment team. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, being a former senator, was more familiar and skillful in dealing with Congress. She gained support from Speaker Jose de Venecia in the House and Franklin Drilon in the Senate, through some legislators still pursued probes on questionable matters of her administration. So this topic explains the relationship between the President and Congress in the Philippines after the 1986 IDSA People Power Revolution. So the President needed the support of the legislator to pass laws and implement government programs, so cooperation, bargaining, and coalition building were important. So during the presidency of Corazon Aquino, executive legislative relations involved compromise because of the multi-party system and shifting alliances in Congress. So but important laws like the Local Government Code of 1991 were still passed. Fidel B. Ramos strengthened relations with Congress through coalition building and the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, which helped pass many bills. So Joseph Estrada had conflicts with Congress and was later impeached by the House of Representatives. So Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who was a former senator, was more experienced in dealing with Congress and gained support from leaders in both the House and Senate, although investigations about her administration still happen. Next, we have judicial independence. With President Corazon Aquino, Fidel Ramos, and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the judiciary performed its functions without presidential interference. So presidential appointment of Supreme Court member followed check and balance in the 1987 Constitution. Chief Justice Hilario David presided over the impeachment of Joseph Estrada according to constitutional provisions. During IDSA 1, Chief Justice Claudio T. Hanke administered the oath of office to Corazon Aquino. During IDSA 2, the Supreme Court was involved in the oath of office for Vice President Arroyo to succeed President Estrada in the Estrada B. Desierto and Estrada B. Bacapagal Arroyo cases. So the court reviewed whether Estrada had resigned, affecting Arroyo's legitimacy. Estrada declared on January 20, 2021 his inability to discharge powers and duties, making the Vice President acting president by law and constitution. The Supreme Court used evidence and events of IDSA 2 and ruled that Estrada had resigned based on his act and omissions before, during, and after January 20, 2001. During nga time, ang Supreme Court nagtrabaho sila nga walay interference sa presidente. So sa IDSA 2, gi-review nila ang sitwasyon ni Joseph Estrada ug gi-decide nga siya resign base sa iyang gibuhat. So mao ang mga Vice President nga si Gloria Macapagal Arroyo mo siya ang nipuli isip nga usa ka presidente. We have the civilian supremacy over the military. So the president's civilian supremacy over the military was tested by 7 coup attempts during Corazon Aquino's administration in the Oakwood Mutiny 2003 against Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Key military leaders supported IDSA 1 and IDSA 2, which toppled Marcos and Estrada. So Aquino overcame the 7 coup attempts with support from Fidel Ramos and military officials committed to their constitutional rule. She addressed military grievances, initiated professionalization and modernization of the EFE, but her defendants in the military hindered prosecution of human rights violators. Ramos kept the military within constitutional limits, unified and professionalized the armed forces, modernized the EFE, and followed retired military participation in national economic recovery. He was perceived as weak in granting amnesty to rebels and punishing human rights violators. Estrada both pleased and displeased the military. He suspended EFE modernization programs, funded weapons and prosecutor and directed total war against insurgents. So the military joined IDSA 2, supporting the people against Estrada. So Arroyo monitored the military's needs for benefits, power, and participation, appointed retired officers, and quickly suppressed the 2003 coup, showing the military could still threaten democracy and executive power. So the post-Marcos issue of military insurgenization is linked to the politicization of the military, its historical function, and the context of military power in democracy and development. During nga time sa panahon ni Corazon Aquino, gisulayan niya ang mga civilian supremacy over the military tungod sa 7 ka coup attempts gikan sa military groups. So bisan pa napildi ni Aquino ang mga coup sa tabang sa military nga loyal sa iha mao si sa panahon ni Fidel Ramos. So napugngan niya ang coup attempts og gi-professionalize ang militar. So si Joseph Estrada adunay lain-laing relasyon sa militar ug ang uban military leaders misuporta sa IDSA 2 nga nakapahawa kaniya sa pwesto. So sa panahon ni Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, nahitabo ang Oakwood Mutiny, so usa ka coup attempts sa militar diha sa gobyerno. So bisan dali ra kini na pugnan na pakita kini nga adunay mga puwersa sa militar nga mahimong threaten sa demokrasya ug sa mga otoridad sa presidente. Next, we have the executive direction, the bureaucracy, and development. So the president executive direction covers the bureaucracy of the central government, including offices, civil servants, and government-owned corporations for implementation, execution, management, and administration of policies and laws. These include formulation and implementation of programs for development and delivery of supremacy over the military and covered local government until the government gikan sa military groups. President Aquino Ramos Estrada and Arroyo ang mga coup sa tabang sa society, military and government. Sa luya sa ihang responsibilities to the next panahon ni Fidel Ramos. So napugnan niya ang coup attempts to constitutionalize, stabilize democratic institution and adunay peace, lain-laing order, economic, and social military leaders developing misuporta sa IDSA 2 nga pahawa kaniya sa pwesto. Aquino, so sa panahon ni Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, nahitabo
nga ang
ang
awkward
mo
nga
ni siya nga
ma-restore
ma-restore
nila
nila
ang
ang sa
kuan
militar
ang
diya
nahitabo
sa
sa mga
gobyerno.
para
So bisan dali ra kini na
dito sa
pugnan
peace,
na
order,
makita
economic,
kini
and
nga
social
adunay mga
development.
pwersa
So,
sa
the
militar nga
executive bureaucracy consisted
mahimong
of
threaten sa
departments and
demokrasya o sa mga
agencies to carry out the
otoridad sa
sub-constitutional functions
sa
on
presidente.
policy formulation and execution. So, devolution through the local government code was pursued since 1992. President also conducted bureaucratic reform and re-engineering for effective service delivery and dealt with government personnel and human resource development, including the civil service and public management system through national government line department. President implemented priority programs for social and economic development. So the next part we have the bureaucratic reform. So what is bureaucratic reform? So bureaucratic reform means changes or improvements in the government bureaucracy so that government offices work better, faster, and more honest. Corazon Aquino set up regional development councils for economic and social planning. She initiated administrative reforms for accountability for performance appraisal, security of tenure promotion, salary standardization, and capacity building of public employees. With devolution of 1992, local government units took over tasks from national bureaucracy. So Fidel Ramos pursued modernization and capacity building of EFP, COMELEC, Department of Justice, Sandigan Bayan, and fully implemented devolution. His bureaucracy pursued innovative programs in health, shelter, environment, and meet international commitments. So Joseph Estrada focused on low financial capacity, cost-cutting measures, and appointed expert academics and progressive leaders. He resisted recentralization of health and agriculture and emphasized local government capability. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo cited achievements in administrative, market, agricultural, and criminal justice reform. Critics noted compromises in appointing political allies and weaknesses in bureaucracy of international revenue and commission and election. So the Department of Interior and Local Government implemented timely release of LGU share and IRA strengthening LGU capacity and barangay operations. So mao ni siya ang mga nabuhat itong ilang Corazon Aquino, Fidel Ramos ug Joseph Estrada ug Gloria Macapagal Arroyo diri mao ni siya ang ilang mga nabuhat or mga changes. Next, we have the international relations. So Corazon Aquino protected the Philippines' people power and democratic transitions in international meetings and state visits, resulting in bilateral and multilateral cooperation, support, aid, soft loans, grants, and official development assistance or the ODA. She is also forged relationship with Eastern European states. So Fidel Ramos entered into six treaties or international agreements with Senate concurrence and 31 resolution with Congress concurrence. He pursued international relations with ASEAN, APEC, and the United Nations to support economy strategy, social reform, sustainable development, human rights, and global stability. We have the Joseph Strada attended APEC and ASEAN's meeting to raise Philippine issues, support regional economic recovery, peace, security, and stability, and address China's claim over the Spratly Island and the visiting forces agreements with the United States. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo focused on war against terrorism, signed agreements with China on prohibited drugs, and participated in Asian Valley Concord 2 and UN peacekeeping missions. For economic development, she used official development assistance, monitored World Trade Organization participation, and supported Filipino overseas contract workers through the Department of Foreign Affairs. Next, we have the civil society, church, public opinion, and media. So civil society, including NGOs, people organization, business, labor, and the media gained political power through IDSA 1 and IDSA 2. Many NGOs became involved in policy advocacy, legislative, and executive policy making, and supported political candidates. So the 1987 Constitution and 1992 Local Government Code give legitimacy to their participate in governance. All four presidents engaged in coalition building with sectors and groups for political support and legitimacy. Ramos was skillful in coalition building for development programs. Strada created non-profit organization linked to him and his family, which caused conflict of interest and led to plunder charges. So Arroyo used civil society language as core values: transparency, good governance and legitimacy, accountability, and appointed NGO activists to government positions. The Catholic Church, particularly Cardinal Hyacin, influenced President on various issues, including population, constitutional amendments, and Estrada's resignation. So the media became a major participant in democracy, transparency, and accountability, including coverage of impeachment proceedings. President Aquino, Ramos, and Arroyo responded to public opinion and surveys, with Arroyo being particularly anxious about her popularity. Next, we have the counterinsurgency and peace and order. So, President focused on peace and order, dealing with the more Islamic Liberation Front, Communist Party of the Philippines, and New People's Army. So, Aquino created the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, implemented the National Reconciliation and Development Program, so professionalized the armed forces of the Philippines, and punished military coup participants. Ramos continued negotiation with rebel, communist, and Muslim groups, forged peace agreements in Mindanao, and created the Southern Philippine Council for Peace and Development. So Estrada prioritized peace and order through reforms in law enforcement and judicial system against criminality, terrorism, kidnapping, and drugs. Arroyo continued peace efforts, set up offices and mechanisms for conflicts, and used the Department of Interior and local government for public safety. We have the socio-economic planning and development. So President implemented programs for human development and basic services through the government bureaucracy. Dismantled crony capitalism and monopolies, complied with foreign debt, privatized government corporations, promoted agrarian reform, industrialization, environment protection, export developments, and expanded health, education, housing, infrastructure, energy, transportation, and science and technology. So Ramos integrated social and economic programs. We have the promoted poverty elevation, human development, deregulations, privatization, trade, industry, tourism, and environmental protection, achieving economic turnaround. So Estrada focused on the poor and underprivileged with programs for food, jobs, social housing, health, education, basic services, and development in regions through special economic zones. So Arroyo emphasized free enterprise according modernization, so emphasize pre-enterprise agriculture modernization, information technology, job creations, housing and health financing, and development for farmers, worker class, urban poor, but her successor term had minimal economic growth. So there is a socio-economic planning and development. Mao ni siya ang nangabuhat sa mga president sama ni na Aquino, Ramos, ni Macapagal, ni Arroyo, and then ni Estrada. The leadership, accountability, and integrity. So Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's presidential bid for her own elective term while still in office raised issues about access to government resources, was perceived as indecisive, and was criticized for fluffing on policy issues. So Corazon Aquino scored positive for abiding by the constitutional one-time term of 6 years. So Fidel Ramos scored positive for abiding by the constitutional one-time term of 6 years. And Joseph Estrada was involved in alleged plunder of 3.5 billion in public funds and illegal commissions. Leadership, accountability, ug integrity. So diri lain-lain nga ang mga panghitabo sa mga presidente. So si Gloria Macapagal Arroyo iyang gisaway tungod kay nidagan siya para sa iyang own elective term. Samtang presidente pa siya og niingon siya nga adunay access sa government resources. So giingon usab nga siya indecisive og usahay flip-flopping sa policy issues. So sa laing bahin si Corazon Aquino ug si Fidel B. Ramos giila nga positive tungod kay nisunod sila sa constitutional one-time term of 6 years, samtang si Joseph Estrada nasangkot sa alag plunder nga 3.5 billion sa public funds ug illegal commissions. So mao nga bantayan pag-ayo sa legislators, civil society, media ug public opinion ang mga action sa president ug sa gobyerno.
So, in conclusion, since the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, the crucial mandates of the Philippine President as Chief Executive of the state and government are the restoration and consolidation of democracy, constitutionalism and rule of law, public accountability, and human development. The 1987 Philippine Constitution defined the power of the president within certain limits, strengthened the legislature, and encouraged civil society participation in decision making. The one time 6 year term and provisions on impeachment and succession were tested. In the Estrada case, the dominant Philippine president of the past gave way to the coalition building president due to the nuances of post EDSA politics. Presidents Corazon Aquino, Fidel Ramos, Joseph Estrada, and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo had to contend with a multi party system, multiple power centers, changing loyalties, and civil society and people power. Aquino relied more on broad based societal sectors, Ramos and Arroyo mastered coalition building, and Estrada relied on mass support. Their presidential campaigns differ based on historical, political, and personal circumstances, with Aquino using anti Marcos appeal, Ramos competing as a minority president, and Estrada and Arroyo using celebrity appeal. The prospects of new post EDSA politics, one due to old patronage politics and charges of electoral fraud, redemocratization, restore democratic institutions, but its success depends on presidential behavior. Public accountability was enforced by civil society, legislators, media, and public opinion. The president's performance and executive direction of the bureaucracy and national development was adequate. But challenges remain in people's welfare, poverty alleviation, employment, productivity, economic growth, and social equity. Attention to the military, peace process with insurgent and secessionist groups, human rights, and the place of the Philippines in globalization will continue to be high priority. Prospects of character change, including the shift from presidential to parliamentary system of government, will affect the Philippine executive and the configuration of the office of the president. So, in conclusion, our report after the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, the Philippine president had important responsibilities. So, this includes the bringing back democracy following the constitution and the law, making government officials accountable and improving people's lives. So, the 1987 Philippine Constitution explained the power of the president but also limited those powers. It made the Congress stronger and allowed citizens and organizations to participate in government decisions. The president can only serve one six-term years. Rules about impeachment and succession were tested during the presidency of Joseph Estrada. After EDSA, the powerful presidents of the past were replaced by presidents who needed to build alliances with different political groups. Political Corazon Aquino, Fidel Ramos, Joseph Estrada, and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo had to deal with many politicians' parties, powerful groups, changing loyalties, and active citizens. Each president used different ways to gain support. So, Aquino gained support from many groups in society and people who opposed Marcos. Ramos built strong political alliances to lead the government. Estrada relied on the support of the masses. Arroyo also used alliances and her popularity. However, the hope for better politics after EDSA became weaker of old patronage politics and accusations of cheating in elections. Democracy returned after EDSA, but its success depends on how the president behaved and governed. Government accountability was watched by civil society groups, lawmakers, and media, and the public. The presidents were somewhat successful in leading the government and managing development, but the Philippines still faces many problems such as poverty, unemployment, low productivity, slow economic growth, and inequality. So the government must also focus on the military, peace talks with rebel and separatist groups protecting human rights and the Philippines' role in globalization. There are also discussions about changing the constitution, possibly changing the government system from presidential to parliamentary, which could change the role and the power of the president. So that's the end of our report, ma'am, and thank you.